There is a moment most people never talk about. It doesn't happen in a boardroom or at a graduation podium or in the middle of some sweeping crisis. It happens quietly, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while you're standing in the shower, sometimes while you're staring out a window pretending to think about something else entirely. It's the moment you feel the pull of something new, something bigger, something that scares you just enough to make you hesitate. And then you don't do it. You talk yourself out of it. You build a very rational, very sensible case for why now is not the right time, why the risks are too great, why you have too much to lose, why the responsible thing, the mature thing, the smart times thing is to stay put. And life goes on. The days pass. You find other things to occupy your mind. But years later, 10 years later, you will remember that moment, and you will ask yourself, what would have happened if I had said yes? Jeff Bezos has spent decades thinking about that question, and what he discovered changed not just his life, but the way millions of people understand theirs. In 1994, Jeff Bezos had what most people would call the perfect life. He was a senior vice president at D.E. Shaw, one of the most prestigious and successful hedge funds on Wall Street. He was young, brilliant, well-compensated, and on a fast track to even greater success. By every conventional measure, he had made it. And then he read a statistic that he couldn't unread. Internet usage was growing at 2,300% per year. Something ignited inside him. He started imagining what that meant, what it could mean, for commerce, for connection, for the way human beings bought and sold things. He started imagining a store that didn't have shelves, didn't have walls, didn't have geographic limits. A store that could carry everything. He started imagining Amazon. But here's what you need to understand about that moment. He was times terrified. Not of failure, exactly. Of something more personal. Of walking away from everything he had built. Of disappointing people who believed in him. Of looking foolish. Of being wrong. Of making a decision he couldn't take back. He went to his boss at the time, and to his boss's credit, the man told him to think carefully. He said, "That's a really good idea, but it would be a better idea for someone who didn't already have a good job." And he was right. That was the safe and sensible view, the rational view, the view that protected everything Bezos had already accumulated. Bezos went home and thought about it for 48 hours. And then he developed a framework that would guide him for the rest of his life. A framework so elegant, so simple, so ruthlessly effective, that once you hear it, you will never make an important decision the same way again. He called it the regret minimization framework. It's the moment you feel the pull of something new, something bigger, something that scares you just enough to make you hesitate. And then you don't do it. You talk yourself out of it. You build a very rational, very sensible case for why now is not the right time. Why the risks are too great. Why you have too much to lose. Why the responsible thing, the mature thing, the smart times thing is to stay put. And life goes on. The days pass. You find other things to occupy your mind. But years later, 10 years later, you will remember that moment. And you will ask yourself, what would have happened if I had said yes? Jeff Bezos has spent decades thinking about that question. And what he discovered changed not just his life, but the way millions of people understand theirs. Here is how Bezos has described it, in his own words, across dozens of interviews and speeches over the years. I wanted to project myself forward to age 80 and say, okay, now I'm looking back on my life. I want to have minimized the number of regrets I have. I knew that when I was 80, I was not going to regret having tried this. I was not going to regret trying to participate in this thing called the internet that I thought was going to be a really big deal. I knew that if I failed, I wouldn't regret that. But I knew the one thing I might regret is not ever having tried. And I knew that would haunt me every day. Read that again. Let it land. He didn't ask, what is the safest choice? He didn't ask, what will people think of me if this fails? He didn't ask, what do I have to lose? He asked, when I am 80 years old, looking back at the whole of my life, what will I regret not having done? That single shift in perspective from present fear to future regret is one of the most powerful mental moves a human being can make. It doesn't eliminate risk. It doesn't guarantee success. What it does is something far more important. It aligns your decisions with your deepest values rather than your immediate anxieties. Because here's what fear does. Fear is short-sighted. Fear lives entirely in the present tense. Fear looks at the obstacle in front of you and makes it feel like the only thing that exists. Fear whispers that the risk of acting is unbearable, while quietly ignoring the far greater risk of never acting at all. But regret? Regret lives in the future. And when you force yourself to inhabit that future, when you actually times go there, times in your mind, when you sit with your 80-year-old self and look back, you discover something remarkable. The things you're most afraid of today rarely look that frightening from that vantage point. What looks frightening from there is the life you didn't live. The chances you didn't take, the voice inside you that you silenced because the timing wasn't perfect. Bezos got in his car. He and his wife Mackenzie drove across the country from New York to Seattle, and as he drove, he wrote the business plan for Amazon on his laptop. He didn't wait until he had every answer. He didn't wait until the fear went away. He drove times into times the uncertainty, armed with nothing but a framework, a vision, and the radical decision not to let present-day fear write the story of his future. To truly understand the Bezos minimization framework and why it works with such consistency, you need to understand something that psychologists have confirmed through decades of research. Human beings experience two fundamentally different kinds of regret, and they are not equal. The first is the regret of action. This is the regret you feel when you do something and it goes wrong. You took the risk and it didn't pay off. You made the leap and you landed badly. You quit the job and the startup failed. You had the difficult conversation and it made things worse. This kind of regret is real and it hurts. It also tends to be temporary. When we fail at something we genuinely attempted, we have the remarkable human capacity to adapt, to learn, to find meaning in the struggle, to eventually say, "Times I tried, and I don't regret trying." The second is the regret of inaction. This is the regret of the road not taken. The business you never started. The person you never told you loved them. The move you never made. The book you never wrote. The life you always meant to live, but never quite got around to beginning. And this kind of regret, it doesn't fade. If anything, it grows. It compounds quietly over decades, like interest on a debt you keep telling yourself you'll deal with later. And by the time most people reckon with it fully, it has calcified into something that can't quite be fixed. Study after study in psychology bears this out. When researchers ask older adults to reflect on their biggest regrets, the vast majority across cultures, across income levels, across every demographic you can measure, name things they didn't, do, not things they did. The business, not started. The passion, not pursued. The word, not spoken. The risk, not taken. Bezos understood this intuitively before the research confirmed it, and he built it into the foundation of every major decision he's ever made. The question isn't whether you will have regrets. You will. Everyone does. The question is, which kind do you choose? Once you understand the regret minimization framework, Amazon starts to make a different kind of sense. When Bezos launched Amazon, most people thought it was a niche experiment, an online bookstore. Quaint, perhaps, but not world-changing. Within a few years, he expanded into music, electronics, toys, everything. Analysts called it reckless. Wall Street punished the stock. Commentators wrote skeptical editorials about whether Bezos truly understood what he was building. He did. He just understood it across a much longer time horizon than most of his critics. In 2006, Amazon launched Amazon Web Services, a cloud computing platform, at a time when Amazon was still primarily thought of as an online retailer. The concept seemed strange, even bizarre, to many observers. Why was a bookstore selling server infrastructure? Why was Bezos diverting resources, attention, and capital towards something so far outside Amazon's apparent core? Because Bezos wasn't looking at 2006. He was looking at 2016. He was looking at 2026. He was looking at the 80-year-old version of himself, asking, "Will I regret not having built this?" AWS today generates hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue and powers a significant portion of the global internet. The same framework, the same long view, the same refusal to let short-term anxiety override long-term vision. But this isn't just a story about Amazon. It isn't even fundamentally a story about business. It's a story about how you live. Here is something important that often gets lost when people discuss Bezos's frameworks and philosophy. They were never just business tools. They were life tools. They were personal before they were professional. The decision to leave D.E. Shaw and start Amazon wasn't a strategic calculation. It was a deeply personal reckoning with the question of who Bezos wanted to be and what kind of life he wanted to have lived when he looked back at it from the end. Bezos has spoken often about the concept of being a curious person. He has described his sense of wonder, his obsession with invention, his belief that the most interesting problems are the ones that seem impossible until suddenly they aren't. He has talked about how staying at D.E. Shaw, as comfortable and successful as that life would have meant quieting that part of himself, packing it away, telling it to wait. And that is something he knew, at the deepest level, he would regret. So the question for you right now, wherever you are in your life, is not, what would Jeff Bezos do? The question is, what is the thing you are quietly packing away? What is the idea you keep returning to and then talking yourself out of? What is the conversation you've been avoiding? What is the version of yourself that you keep deferring, telling yourself the timing isn't right, the conditions aren't perfect, you'll get to it eventually? Because the clock is running, not in a morbid way, in the most clarifying, honest, motivating way possible. When you are 80 years old and one day, if you are fortunate, you will not remember the meetings you avoided. You will not remember the embarrassment you saved yourself. You will not remember how sensible your decision to stay safe felt in the moment. What you will remember is the texture of your life, the chances you embraced, the things you built, the person you chose to become. There is a particular lie that fear tells us, with extraordinary consistency and eloquence. It is one of the most seductive and destructive lies in the human experience. It goes like this: not yet. The moment isn't right. Wait until you're more ready. Wait until conditions improve. Wait until you have more resources, more certainty, more confidence. Then you will act. Bezos has demolished this lie across decades of interviews, shareholder letters, and speeches, not with inspirational platitudes, but with the observable evidence of his own life and the lives of the people he has watched most closely. I think most people, Bezos has said, don't give themselves permission to be bold. That phrase deserves a long, slow moment of attention. Permission to be bold. He's not talking about talent. He's not talking about intelligence or resources or luck. He's talking about permission, the internal authorization to act as if your dreams matter enough to pursue seriously. Most people are waiting for someone else to give them that permission. A mentor, a parent, a boss, the market, the culture, the right set of circumstances. They are waiting to feel ready, not realizing that readiness is not a feeling you arrive at. Readiness is a decision you make. Bezos started Amazon out of the back of a garage. He used door desks made from cheap lumber because he couldn't afford better furniture. The early employees packed books into boxes themselves. The warehouse was a table. The whole enterprise, in its first incarnation, looked like exactly the kind of scrappy, underfunded, improbable thing that careful people would advise against. But Bezos wasn't waiting for permission or perfect conditions. He was operating from the future backward, asking not, is this feasible today? But is this something I want to have tried? The answer was yes. Unambiguously, defiantly, joyfully, yes. And so he began. Let's do the exercise right now, not abstractly, for real. Close your eyes if you're willing, or simply sit with this. You are 80 years old. Your hair is different. Your body has changed. The world around you is different in ways you couldn't have predicted. You are looking back. What do you see? Do you see a life lived on your own terms? Imperfect, sometimes painful, full of failures that taught you something vital but times yours? Do you see evidence of the thing inside you that you honored, that you took seriously, that you actually showed up for? Or do you see a life spent carefully? A life in which you preserved your comfort at the cost of your potential? A life in which you waited and waited and waited for permission, for certainty, for the fear to subside, and the waiting simply became the life itself? Bezos has said that we are what we repeatedly do, and he has modeled, across decades, the practice of choosing his future self over his present fears. Not carelessly, not recklessly, with intelligence, with preparation, with tremendous effort, but always, always with his 80-year-old self in the room, watching, waiting, asking, "Is this who you wanted to be?" That voice is available to you, right now, today. Here is what all of this comes down to. You are going to make a decision, maybe today, maybe in the next week, or the next month, a decision about whether to begin something, change something, say something, risk something, a decision about the version of yourself you are willing to inhabit. And fear is going to show up. It always does. Fear is not a sign that you're on the wrong path. Fear is often the clearest signal that you're standing at the edge of something real. The question is not whether you feel afraid. The question is which timeline you're living in when you make the choice. Are you living in the cramped, anxious, present-tense timeline where the only thing that's visible is what you have to lose right now? Or are you living in the long timeline, the full life timeline, where what matters is the story you're building, the person you're becoming, the things you will and won't have tried? Jeff Bezos drove across the country toward an uncertain future, writing a business plan in a moving car, because he asked himself the right question, not, "What if this fails?" but, "What if, at 80, I wish I had tried?" You know the answer to your own version of that question. You've known it for a while, probably. The only decision left is whether you're going to let present-day fear make your choices, or whether you're going to trust your 80-year-old self to know what mattered. Choose the long view. Build the thing. Have the conversation. Make the leap. Minimize the regret. That is the only decision, 10 years from now, you will be glad you made. In the end, we are our choices. Build yourself a great story. Jeff Bezos.